An uplifter is a compelling leader who tries to breathe life and hope into people around them.
Who listen and care and guide and help.
Whose way of being in the world inspires.
Who uplifts with humor and understanding. Who leads by example.
Don't judge. Vulnerable.
Bold determination.
Who are here to create a better world.
Who can learn and teach.
Who encourages you.
Who shines their light to lead other people.
Who uses their best self in order to help others.
I found the life that I liked and I worked toward that.
We are all uplifters. Mwah, big love.
Hey Uplifters, I am Lisa Crozier and I am nominating Beth Carroll, Pastor Beth Carroll for the Uplifters because she is strong and she's courageous and she stands her ground. She's got a backbone. She's incredibly inspiring and insightful, and she has been forging the path as a woman in ministry who has very strong social activism beliefs in a community where it sometimes is accepted and sometimes it's not. And I'm just so absolutely in awe of her and her strength and her message. And I love her dearly.
Welcome to the Uplifters podcast. I'm Aranza Savas. If you recognized that voice you just heard recommending today's guest, it's because that was Lisa Crozier from episode 13 of the Uplifters podcast. And for those of you who've been with us for a while, you know that our show is an uplifter chain. So here's what I know so far about Beth. So we're all at the same point in this. Beth is a reverend who serves as senior pastor at Oakland City Church. She specializes in creating safe and brave spaces for those experiencing unwelcome or trauma in the church, especially those in the LGBTQIA community and others marginalized because of their mental health. Beth, thank you for taking time from your really important work to join us today on the Uplifters podcast. I'm so excited to meet you.
I'm absolutely excited to be here.
Thank you. I want to hear first when you knew you wanted to be a reverend.
Okay, so no one's more surprised that I took this path than me. This is a second career for me. So I grew up, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be an actor. That was my life's dream. And life circumstances ended up taking a completely different turn. I did study it in college, but ended up having a family instead. And so my life went into a different direction. I did what a lot of arts majors do, is I went into sales. So I was at a sales career for many years, loved it, love relationships, love people. And becoming a pastor happened kind of in the second half of my life. My faith has always been really important to me. I grew up in the church. My parents were missionaries when I was a little kid. Both my grandfathers were pastors. It's the family business, but not for women. So it wasn't that I was discouraged. It just wasn't modeled for me to do something like that ever. But it got to be when my midlife crisis was kind of a deconstruction of my faith. I was going through a divorce. It was under really challenging circumstances. My first husband really struggled with addiction, and that had an incredible impact on our family. And in the process of leaving and rebuilding my life, I really started taking the Bible seriously, my religion seriously, and away from myself that I don't think I had to do before. The stakes were a lot higher for me in terms of my life. And I needed a lot of comfort. I needed community. And when I started reading the Bible for myself, I saw a story. I saw a narrative, themes where the life of Jesus was one of radical inclusion, was one of justice. And what I began to realize that the job of the church is one that should be about that work of justice and inclusion. And at the time, in my context, I was seeing not only a church that was not about that work, it was the very obstacle to that work. And that infuriated me. God had just been too important to me. My relationship to God had been too caring, too incredible for an institution to get in the way of allowing other people to discover that too. So I knew I had to do one of two things. I had to either quit the church or I had to dig deeper and do something about it. So I decided to do something about it. So at 35, I quit my job. Actually, I was let go of my job. That's a whole other story. But circumstances started to unfold themselves in such a way that it became very obvious that the next step was for me to go to school, to reinvent my life and my calling.
Okay. It's no small feat there.
Any one of those little threads could be a whole new story.
Okay. What did it mean to reinvent your calling?
So I'm a singer, and for many years, I studied privately with different instructors. And when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, I was studying voice with a man named Nicholas. Nicholas was a retired opera singer. He had moved to our small little community, which was this tiny little town in Holland, Michigan at the time. I don't live there anymore. And it was a very nice place, but it was a very traditional conservative place. And Nicholas was married to his wonderful spouse, David. And in the course of studying with Nicholas, not only was he a fabulous instructor, but we became dear friends. And on a weekly basis, Nicholas would share with me what it was like for him as a gay man living in our nice little town, and the stories that he told me about being denied housing because he was gay, and the things that people would say and do to him in the name of religion, specifically in the name of Christianity, were horrible. And because that was about the same time I was going through my divorce, I started visiting other churches because it was time for a reset for me to go someplace else. And I would visit a church, and then the next lesson, I would go in and Nicholas would ask me, "Oh, where did you visit this week?" And I would tell him, and then I would chatter on about, the sermon and the music and whatever. And then he would wait a beat. And then he would say to me, "Would I be welcome there?" And I would have to no, Nicholas would not be welcome there. And this pattern went on for several weeks. And that is really what started to make me grieve and be angry for what I was seeing before me, because that, once again, was not what I was reading in the Bible. It's not what I felt like was our call on people who identify as Christians to do. And I have a little bit of a bulldog streak in me. It's what my dad used to call me when I was little, where if something is not fair, I get angry. I'm not a very angry person in general. I realize I've mentioned anger several times already, but injustice and things that are not fair have been one of the biggest things that have made me angry ever since I was a little girl. So seeing something that wasn't fair in this instance, I just couldn't live with that. It just was unacceptable.
And so what did that fire up in you to do?
This was the moment. It was the moment that I started doing some soul searching. I mean, as a single parent, I was the sole breadwinner for my kids. And, in my prayer life, I'm like, God, I don't know how on earth this is going to happen. I cannot afford to quit my job and to go to seminary full time and support 2 kids. This is just ridiculous. I can't do that. Meanwhile, I was in a job that I hated. It was a dead-end job, but we were in the middle of a recession at the time. I couldn't quit. So I'm holding in tension this need to provide for my kids and this need to do something that filled me and felt like was fulfilling my purpose. And I'll never forget. So I was in the process of investigating financial aid and wondering if I should just quit my job. And so talking to the admissions people at the seminary and talking to my pastor at the time. And I actually had come to the conclusion that I can't do this. This is too much. My kids have been through too much. I will revisit this when they're in high school. son, at the time, my son was about 15 and my daughter was like 12. So I'm like, there's just no way I can do this now. So I kid you not 24 hours after I'd made that decision. It was a Sunday when I made that decision. I went into work on a Monday. HR called me into their office and I was let go. And it was like, are you kidding me right now? Like the dead end job that I didn't think I could escape, that I hated, like the decision was taken out of my hands. And I just knew, like, this is my time. So I am going to go to seminary and we're gonna make this work. I found a bartending job. I'd never bartended before, but it was like something that I could do like nights while I was in school during the day, and allowed me to still go to like my kids' basketball games. And so we made it work.
That's amazing. I had a very similar situation in that I had been in a wonderful job with a wonderful company that I loved, and I knew I needed to graduate and leave the nest. And so I had set with all of my friends this very specific intention that I would leave my job on March 1st. And I didn't. So on March 3rd, I got laid off.
No way.
I was like, all right, okay. Hear you loud and clear, universe. Let's go.
Totally.
Yeah. And so you take this big leap
Mm-hmm.
and you lean into the possibilities,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it was such an interesting shift in your storytelling there because you started off with, well, here's all the reasons this is an insane idea and all the reasons I clearly cannot do this right now.
Right.
To, oh, well, clearly there are ways to address every single one of those challenges. And now is the time. So we're going to do it.
Definitely.
Did you walk into divinity school saying, hey, I believe the Bible is telling us a narrative of inclusion and justice, and I'm here to spread that story?
Absolutely. And the reality is the seminary that I went to, I would describe as being pretty moderate. In fact, a number of the professors that I have were very progressive thinkers. I had this one professor in particular who just invited me. He could see that like, oh, she's one of those. She's one of those, kind of big mouth, big idea, big hearted kind of people. And I'm so grateful. Like he was a theology professor who taught a lot of progressive theologies, like liberation theology, queer theology, and just things like womanist theology, feminist theology, all the things. And I just ate it up. And had he not invited me to one of his classes, because typically speaking, there hasn't been a lot of women who go to seminary, first of all. Second of all, when they do go, they tend to like gravitate towards the pastoral care, kind of the counseling kind of track. They're not as attracted to the theology track. And before that invitation, that had been me. I had been like, oh, I just love people and I want to do things to listen and guide people. It wasn't there wasn't representation like in theology. So he invited me and I fell in love with ethics and theology. And I just dug in, and that ended up being my track. So very quickly, I found my people. And so it wasn't like this, I have to hold on to what I believe. And, these people are going to try to shake it out of me. It was like, I walked in with a spark and they threw in drops of gasoline. And so all of those passions ignited while I was at seminary. So yeah, I was really blessed to be connected with the right people in the right circumstances.
And what has the response been in the outside world now to this big mouthed, big ideaed, big hearted woman spreading a story of inclusion and justice?
So the first part of my pastoral career was in the Midwest. So in this tiny little town in Holland, Michigan. And I was a part of a church there that I would say was a fantastic match for all of those values. This is a church that had been open and affirming for probably close to 20 years. They were known in town as being kind of like the edgy, kind of more progressive place. And so I never had to justify who I was, what I believed. Like it was all of this yes, we love what you're talking about. And so there was this wonderful nest, I think, to kind of strengthen my leadership wings. Meanwhile, because of the amount of, and I don't mean any disrespect for people who have more conservative leaning views, but there was also a number of church environments in this town where it was traumatizing and abusive towards specifically LGBTQIA people. And so you could throw a rock in any direction and find somebody who is LGBTQIA and deeply harmed by the church. And so to be able to meet people, and I think my favorite part of the job was to meet somebody, look them dead in the eye, and say, "You are good. God broke the mold with you. You are beautiful." To be able to use my, mantle with the word, with the word reverend on it, and to be able to speak life into people. I am a straight identifying woman, but I know what it's like. I've had some of my own past church traumas in my past. I've been kicked out of church. When I was 22 years old, I had an unexpected pregnancy, and the church that I was going to at the time, I was terrified. I was alone. My boyfriend and I at the time went to the pastor because I so desperately needed support and care. And meanwhile, the pastor had heard why I was coming in, unbeknownst to me. I poured out my heart to this man. He listened. And when I got done, he leaned down and he picked up a stack of books and magazines on why premarital sex is wrong, dropped it on the desk, and shoved it at me. And then, I was really involved in the church. I was singing the church, everything. And he's like, "Yeah, you need to take a break from all of those things because we need to care for you." It was just ridiculous. It was an utter lie. And so that has been deeply formational for me. Like, I learned in that moment the power a pastor has to either speak life or to speak death. And in that moment, he chose to speak death to me. And it took me years to process that and get over that. So though I don't know what it's like to be pushed out of the church because somebody is gay or trans, I do know what it's like to be pushed out and the power that we have, especially those of us who have any sort of leadership capacity, to speak life into people. And I do that every chance I get, to speak life.
To me, too, it sounds like the difference between acceptance and judgment. And the story I hear you telling is one of acceptance, a God loves everyone story, as opposed to God loves people who look and sound and live like me story.
Absolutely. I mean, who wants to join a place that is not based in love? Why would we even do that to ourselves? So I cannot undo the trauma of other people, but I at least can be, like a rope that allows people to hang on, So yeah, it's a big story. Like, the people who have spoken death over us, the people who have spoken curses, they do not get the last word. They do not. I will not allow that to happen for myself. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure that is the case for others too.
What has that looked like in your work?
That has looked like, what I said earlier in terms of meeting with people one-on-one and choosing to speak love when I know that people like me have not done that. It means that on any given Sunday at church, I'm in a different church now, I have a special affection and eye for the back row peeps. So the people who come in 15 minutes late and they kind of sneak in the back, I love those people. I know what it takes, how brave it is to come into a church for the first time, especially if you've either never gone to church or if church is a source of pain. It takes a lot to set foot in there. And I do not take that for granted for a minute. sometimes I can be overly friendly to people, like to the point, like I got to watch it because sometimes people's eyes will get really big. Like when I see them after the service, I'm like, I'm so glad you're here. And they're like, thank you. I'm like, all right, I'm not going to stalk you. I swear. But it's a gift. People who choose to show up and be a part of our lives, whether that's personally or whether that's in a church, whether that's in a nonprofit, any time when somebody has a choice, like that's a gift. It really is that somebody chooses who doesn't know you yet to extend a little bit of trust. And I hope I never lose sight of that.
And you said that in the beginning, you were in a bubble, a safe place where it was easy to be courageous. I assume from that answer that there was another chapter or other moments where perhaps it wasn't quite so easy to be as courageous or as inviting to be courageous.
Actually, the first thing that comes to mind is I think the biggest obstacle for myself in being courage and having courage has been myself. It's been worrying about what other people think. I am a recovering people pleaser. And especially in my case, I'm also a recovering codependent. So having just all of the addiction in my family. So I grew up with a family member who struggled with addiction, then my first husband. And codependents are funny people in that there's gifts in codependence. Like if you're a codependent, man, you see the best in everybody. Like you are committed, you are loyal to a fault. And so there's gifts in that. But what I've learned through I think both my codependency recovery and my people pleasing recovery is that there's a difference between something that's good and something that's better and something that's best. And so maybe the good is being nice and kind to everybody you encounter. And that's a very good thing. But our energy is finite. And so I do think the best thing is being so centered in who you are created to be, what your focus is, who are the specific people you want to love in your life, that you make sure that they get the best. And and also being okay with the people who you're just simply not called to be with, or the people who are damaging to you. They don't get your best. There's just not enough time and energy. Doesn't mean that you're rude or mean or cruel. It does mean that I'm okay with this person not liking me and letting that go. And again, it is a lifelong work. I get sucked back into what people think. But anyway, to answer your original question, I actually think that it's me, that I decide if I'm courageous and that if other people don't get to decide that for me.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, there have been environments, some environments have been easier than others, right? But yeah, I control what I can control.
And when it feels like the stakes are lower, it feels easier to be courageous. It's not as big an ask.
Totally. Oh my gosh, you're so right. So right.
So you talk about having a real passion and heart for creating safe and courageous spaces. What does that look like?
It is a moving target because depending on the group of people that I'm trying to connect together, each group has different needs. I've just started a group at my current church. It's a group called Holding Hope, and it's one part mental health support group.
Mm-hmm.
It's one part Bible study, and it's a place for both those of us who struggled with our mental health, because I am in that category as well, and for others who have struggled with their mental health, to be able to say me too and listen and love well. Church has also been a complicated place for people who struggle with mental health. Lots of well-meaning people have used Bible verses in such a way that tell us not to be anxious, and all of these kind of things that are so not appropriate and taking certain scripture and words out of context. And creating a safe and brave place for this group has meant, okay, where's your growing edge? Like, what are the kind of things that people have said to you that have not been helpful? What are the kind of things that have been helpful? So, first, sharing my own story, I think, is a way that helps up the trust level, the safe level, so that people are like, oh, okay, like our pastor, she's not perfect. She has her struggles. If she can share, well, then maybe I can too. And so, me creating the safety and being vulnerable gives permission for other people to do the same and be brave. It is huge.
It's huge.
One of the best pieces of advice that I've had in my work. There's a wonderful preacher called Nadia Boltz-Weber, who I love. I've read several of her books. And she has this kind of mantra, which is preach from your scars, not your wounds. And so I work really hard at not hiding my scars, that I've lived life. Like, I'm not going to pretend I've got things all together or that I have all together. I've lived my life. I have my scars and they are part of whom I are. Jesus had scars, like in his resurrected body, when Jesus like rises from the dead and then comes back to earth to say, hey, look, I rose from the dead. That's not a direct quote. He shows his disciples the nail scars in his hands. The scars are still there. They're part of who he is, a part of his story. And our scars are part of our story. So I will show you my scars and hope that you will feel braver in showing yours.
What do you believe happens when we try to hide our scars?
I think we miss out. I think we deny ourselves, the chances for connection. The Surgeon General recently talked about the epidemic of loneliness in our country. I think it's like 1 out of 2 Americans don't have a friend. Oh my gosh. First of all, let's raise our game and be a friend to people. And for those of us who are feeling lonely, man, take a leap, show somebody your scar. Yeah, there are going to be people out there who don't treat it well. And that's awful. But there's also going to be people out there who see your scars as holy and beautiful and a sign of strength. And who doesn't want more of that in their life?
Those are your people.
Those are your people. Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. I think when we hide our scars and our truths, we hide from the opportunity for true love and acceptance.
Absolutely.
Because we can't even feel accepted if we haven't given our truth. And so then whatever is being responded to feels untrue, because the stimuli we have handed as us and has been received, whatever response we're getting is to that, not to our truth. And so we always feel lonely and left out and alienated. And I think one of the big things I take from your story is this idea that if you are in a place where your truth is not accepted, then go. You don't have to stay and fight. You don't have to convince anyone. You don't have to change.
Absolutely.
You just have to go find your place and your people. And that's its own work, but
so true.
So worth it.
So true. Like one of the churches that I went to before I was a pastor in my town of Holland, I went to a place for many years. And it took me 5 years to make one friend there. 5 years. I was like in my 20s. And I think I thought there was something wrong with me. Like, why can't I'm a relatively outgoing person. Like, I like these people. Why doesn't anybody be my friend? And then I finally, like, you know what? Maybe I just need to try another church. And immediately upon changing churches, found my people. And it was a real like, oh, I need to pay attention to that. Like, it might not be that there's something wrong with me. It might be I'm just in the wrong place. You need to find your places where you're celebrated.
Yeah. And I think the other really important message that I take from that is that all churches are not the same.
Oh, they are not.
just because they kind of come from the same source material, there are many different variations of that.
Oh my gosh, so true. Yeah, America's amazing in that way. There are so many choices. So many choices. And it's a double-edged sword because on the one hand, you need to find a place where, yeah, like I said before, you're celebrated and you find your people and you hear a lot of me too, when you start to connect with people. You don't want to veer into this kind of consumerist idea where just because you don't like, you know, the bulletin cover or, the song they sang, because I think that's the trick of community, right? Is it's a commitment. Like, I think so much in our country, we've made religion so much about me, like what I believe. And there's beauty in that. It's not that it's wrong, but we have to balance that with community. Like, what do I have to give here? Not just what do I have to receive, but where can I give? Like, how can I make this place better? So it's those two things in balance.
I think of it weirdly, like the way that we bought our house. We started I know this is not expected, right? But we were like, well, we could focus on like what's the color of the paint and what what is the exact floor plan. But ultimately we made a really excellent choice because we said, how do we want to live within this house? What are the most important values that this house needs to correspond with? And when we came at it from that direction, we actually, ended up buying a house that looked completely different than we ever would have expected, but it felt right. And it
Oh, I so
aligned
love
well with
that.
how we wanted to grow
I
and
love
who
that.
we wanted to be in that house and the life we wanted to create from that place.
Ooh, that's a great foundation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a place that's something that empowers you to live the life that you want to live, which is, yeah, again, like that's what a church should be too.
I think the same is true with relationships, right? Like I could have picked my husband based on his height, his eye color, his hair color, the spelling of his name, but I was like, how do I feel in this relationship?
Mm. Oh, yeah.
And who am I with this person, right? And so I think when we come at the choice of where to invest our spiritual energy or where to find our spiritual community, I guess is the better way to say it. It's all the same conversation wherever we're building something that matters,
Mm-hmm.
to look at it through those same lenses of values and, as you said, the foundational elements.
Absolutely.
So when I think of religion, it feels like in a lot of ways it has become less central to our national culture. And I wonder, for you as someone who had studied it deeply, what do you believe it needs to become in order to achieve great or to find a new space of relevance and value in our world?
Oh, I love this. I get excited over things like this because I like to think about what's next. And yes, certainly institutional religion, not only in our country, but in Europe, numbers are shrinking. It is not the same in what's called the global south. So the other parts of the world, it's actually exploding, which is so fascinating to me. But what I like to think about is it's first of all, it doesn't belong to any of us. Like, so it's going to do what it's going to do. But I think the next kind of iteration, and so whether that's a smaller church, and that's okay. Like, I don't think numbers really kind of define that's interesting information, but it's not necessarily the only information. But I think it goes back down to what I mentioned before in terms of loneliness. That's one of the things we're working at in my current church is I'm currently in the Bay Area where there's a lot of transients, a lot of people who move here, and a lot of people who move away. It was especially true during COVID and now with like all the tech layoffs. And so it's really affecting my region. And so one of the things we're talking about and getting creative about is, oh my gosh, well, if our institution, if our church is here to discover what the needs are in our community and meet those needs. The needs in our community are loneliness. What are we doing to solve the loneliness problem? So, doing a lot of, we're piloting a program like to have meals after church so we can invite people to just share a meal, you know, becoming a culture of invitation and curiosity about other people, inviting people to go on walks with us. Like, what are we doing to check on our neighbor? And I think the more that we lean into discovering what the needs are around us and meeting those needs, the institution will take care of itself. It'll become something else, something beautiful, something that's needed and necessary. And I guess I'm still, at the end of the day, an optimist, and that I believe that that is possible. I think, just even as our country, like as divided as our country is, I believe that so much is still possible for us. But it takes a willingness to be curious about the people we interact with on a daily basis. It takes a willingness to put ourselves out there and to take a risk in love. Can you imagine what it would be like if we all did that?
I want to sit with that image and surround myself with it. I want more of it, right? I want to feel loved and accepted. I want to feel deep, profound connection. As human beings, I think even cynical and the most introverted person craves their flavor of connection. What is next for you, Beth, on your evolution?
What is next is I have a new role. I am in a new place. I moved from Michigan to California
When was that?
9 months ago.
Oh, this is new.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I have a new role. I'm a senior pastor. I'm both just honored and terrified by that, which is because only, I think they wrote a statistic that with senior pastor roles, which is like that the lead pastor role in a church, only 15% of all of those roles are ever women. And so I'm like, "Oh my goodness, what a heavy mantle to carry." But the next thing is I'm learning all about this region. I'm learning about this beautiful church, which is incredibly diverse in every sense of the word, with all of the beauties and challenges with that. So I'm getting to know these people. My husband's family is out here. So I'm getting to know his family, which is they're just incredible people on a more daily basis. So what a gift that is. So yeah, I'm learning this new place and this new work and figuring out how can this, Midwestern nice girl, show up in the big city. So
As her true self.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's not how does this Midwestern nice girl fit into this place, but how does this Midwestern nice girl shine her Midwestern niceness in this place?
Oh, I love that. I love that. That's a good word.
I love it for Oakland.
Thank you. It's a really awesome city.
Yeah.
Really awesome city.
I think when we go into those places that maybe have a different energy and vibe than we do, I like to think of us as balancing them in some way. Like in our little quadrant of this place, it's like, oh, I'm going to bring a little of my balance, my sappy balance.
I love that. I love that. I'm going to remember that.
So, Beth, I like to end our episode with a moment of reflection. Big believer in the power of reflection and taking moments of quiet to sort of let ideas simmer for us. And I suspect you are a woman who asks powerful questions all day. What is one of the most powerful questions that you ask the people you work with?
Probably one of them is, what do you need right now? What do you need right now? Especially since a lot of times when I'm meeting with people, they're in a bad moment, they're in a struggling space, and then leading into whether or not what they need is from me, or helping them identify if what they need is from themselves, or maybe it's a nap. Maybe it's something to eat, a glass of water. What do you need right now?
And I suspect meeting one of those needs often awakens an understanding of other needs to be met.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's like an onion. It peels away.
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
Along that hierarchy of need, right? When we say, okay, my thirst is met. Now I can tune into the fact that what I really need is to scream.
Definitely.
And now I can tune into the need to cry. And now I can tune into the need to hug. So, shall we take a moment together, Beth, and reflect on that for ourselves with the
Absolutely.
Uplifters? All right. I like to do this by grounding my feet. It helps me feel really connected to the sturdiness and the stability of the earth. And I bring one hand to my heart, one to my gut, and close my eyes. Let's just spend these next couple of moments quietly asking ourselves what it is we really need. And maybe as you get curious, you begin to ask yourself, what do I need for my body? What do I need for my heart? What do I need for my mind? And what do I need for my spirit? And breathe that in. And as you are ready, perhaps you want to get curious about what or whom could meet those needs, and what tiny step you might take today or even in this very moment towards meeting your needs. Beth, I am so grateful to have met you and to have heard your story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Aransas. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
For all of you listening, thank you for all that you do in the world. You uplifters, you make this world and your little corner of it better and safer. And may we all tap into a little of this big mouth, big idea, big hearted Beth wisdom here, and allow ourselves to courageously challenge that which is unfair and to advocate for greater acceptance, more love, and more connection. I'll see you over at the uplifterspodcast.com, where you'll hear lots more from Beth and Lisa and lots of other uplifters, as well as bi-weekly, tri-weekly, 3 times a week, I don't know, as well as newsletters from me 3 times a week with lots more uplifting news and stories and ideas from out in the world. Thank you for listening to the Uplifters podcast. If you're getting a boost from these episodes, please share them with the uplifters in your life, and then join us in conversation over at the uplifterspodcast.com. Head over to Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast, and like, follow, and rate our show. It'll really help us connect with more uplifters, and it'll ensure you never miss one of these beautiful stories. Mwah! Big love.
Painted water sunshine with rosemary and thyme. Dwell in the perplexing, though you find it vexing. Toss a star and hover, be your own best lover. Relish in a new prime, plant a tree in springtime. Dance with idle hindsight, bring the sun to twilight. Lift you up whoa, lift you up, whoa, lift you up, whoa, lift you up, lift you up, whoa, lift you up, whoa, lift you up, whoa, lift you up.
Beautiful. I cried. It's that little thing you did with your voice.
Right, in the pre-chorus, right?
I was like...
Mommy, stop crying. You're disturbing the peace.